this is the OnePlus Nord. This is OnePlus's newest phone in their lineup, and the release of this, the marketing, the hype for this was insane. It was almost like there was a second coming of God down to earth, or something earth-shattering. It was the way that OnePlus hyped this up was insane, and honestly, it makes no sense to me. They've just kind of gone crazy with the hype train now, and it is what it is. So this is the cheapest phone in their lineup now. This is kind of what they're kind of bringing in as their return to roots, kind of, the affordable flagship model in their range. It starts at about $300 something at the cheapest place in the cheapest country you can buy it, but most people kind of just say the average price. So around $400 is what this phone costs if it's available in a country you can buy it in. I'll talk about that a little bit later. But what this does is it promises to give you that same OnePlus experience and a flagship camera experience for a much lower price than the OnePlus 8 and 8 Pro. And it is very aggressively priced. I bought mine for $380, and it was a 128 8 gig model. So a very aggressive price. So without wasting too much time, let me get right into the build quality and just the general feel of this phone. All right, so when I first heard about this phone, I realized, and kind of quickly, it was revealed that this phone actually had a plastic build and not a metal build. And that was pretty weird because, OnePlus hasn't really made a plastic phone in a very long time. So it was a little bit of a change up for them. Not to mention that this phone doesn't look like it's made of plastic. It feels and looks very much like it's a aluminum phone. So it was a little bit of a surprise to me, but honestly speaking, it's not that big of a deal because the build quality itself is fantastic. The plastic, I probably wouldn't have realized this is a plastic phone if you hadn't told me. I think that the way it's built, the glass back and everything kind of just gives it that kind of metal feel. That it just makes it feel a lot more premium. There's no gaps. There's no weird creaks. It's just a pretty well built up phone. So that's a very good thing. And that metallic finish on the frame here, it really does make you forget about it ever being plastic. I really don't think that's an issue at all. Despite being the glass on the back, I am upset that they didn't go with wireless charging. I'll talk about that a little bit later. There is no official IP certification on this either, so that is a little bit disappointing, but OnePlus does say they tested in-house and it is dust and water resistant. They do have seals on the SIM card tray and everything, so I do think that it should be okay. It should be okay against splashes and stuff. You shouldn't have to worry too much, but definitely don't be testing this in water and stuff. Just don't do that. As I said, overall fit and finish is really good, and I think that this is definitely up to par with OnePlus phones of the past. The only real downside in this entire build process was, I think, the build quality process has to be just that unboxing experience. That box was shoddy. It was cheap. If you don't know what I'm talking about, go read my blog. I have an entire post about it. It was just a mess. So moving on, let's talk about this fantastic display. So this display is a 6.4-inch 1080p 90 Hz AMOLED screen, and it's a really good screen. It's a flat display, which I think I love the most about it. It's not a curved edge, which really brings me to just tears of joy because of how nice it is. I hate the curved displays. The flat display just makes using the phone so much nicer, no more false touches, and the video and everything just looks fantastic on it when you're watching. It's just really a great thing. Now, there is a pill-style cutout on the top right, and that's unfortunately, they try to hide it with the wallpapers, but let's be real, you just can't. It just doesn't look that good. Let me try to find a app that actually I'm on. I don't have night mode with, so we can try to see. But, because of night mode, because of all the kind of software optimizations, you don't often get to see that, the cutout, but it is definitely there. It's not something you can just ignore. It's going to be an annoying thing throughout. Let me see if, there you go. A lot of times it just cuts out the bar entirely. But yeah, the cutout is very annoying. I wish that they would have just gone with a single camera cutout, and I'll talk about that later as well. But the colors on this display are something that I did notice where there is kind of this weird thing where the normal mode for the display, the colors are a little bit too bland, but when you hit up to advanced, the colors are a little bit too punchy. So I ended up going with the puncher screen because I don't like the dull look of the colors, but there's not really a balance of a middle there. But I think that besides that, it really doesn't matter too much. The auto brightness sensor, that's the worst part of this kind of display, the front part of this phone. That's the one thing that's absolutely horrible and garbage. And this is not new. OnePlus has had issues with this for a long time. I've had at least 3 or 4 OnePlus phones where I've nonstop complained about this. The auto brightness is horrible on this. The proximity sensor is just garbage altogether. So many times when I'm in a call, when I'm trying to, when I put the phone up to my face, it doesn't go black. Or sometimes when I do take my phone away from my face, the screen just doesn't turn on because the proximity sensor is garbage. It doesn't realize that I've taken it away from my face. Auto brightness is horrible. Sometimes it gets extremely dark for no reason. Sometimes it gets extremely bright for no reason. There's never the right amount of brightness, and it just really isn't good. So besides that, the display is absolutely satisfying to me. I think that within the $400 kind of price bracket, this has to be one of the best built displays, like the best compromised displays with all the options and factors it has. Moving on, let's talk about the battery. So this has a 4,115 milliamp hour battery. It comes with a warp charger in the box, a 30-watt fast charger, so that's awesome. It doesn't have wireless charging. It sucks. But the OnePlus 8 Pro didn't, the OnePlus 8 didn't have it, so I didn't expect this to have it, but I really wish they would just put it in because it's not too expensive and it really just makes the experience way better. Charge-wise, I'm getting about 6 to 7 hours of screen on time. I do have daily kind of logs of this on my Twitter. If you want to go check that out, it's over there. You can just see how many hours I use the phone a day and how much screen on time I get. Somewhere between 6 to 7 hours. I've gotten days where it's drastically under that as well. I'm talking 3, 4, 5 hours of screen on time. I really haven't gone above the 8-hour threshold, so I was expecting a little bit more because this has a 735G Snapdragon instead of a 865 that the 8 Pro has, and it has a 90 Hz screen and a 1080p screen and a smaller screen. So comparing it to the OnePlus 8 Pro, I really thought that this would get better battery life, but it just doesn't. It's not up to the par of the 8 Pro as I expected it to be. Besides that, really, I think that the experience of the battery is fine. Moving on, let's talk about the speaker. So the speakers on this are a single firing, bottom firing speaker. I've had issues in the past with bottom firing speakers because what I always say is that they end up being in a position where you block them with your finger when you rest your phone. So whenever you use your phone, you rest a finger under it like this, and what ends up happening is you block the speaker. But this time around, the speaker positioning is quite smart. They've pushed it all the way to the edge. So what happens is it makes the entire speaker, it basically makes sure that you don't cover it. And I think that that's a fantastic move. I haven't covered it accidentally even once. And comparing that to my OnePlus 6T, which also has a single bottom firing speaker that I used a couple of months ago, I would constantly block that, but I never once, by accident blocked the speaker on this, so that's good. No headphone jack, unfortunately, but that's kind of the name of the game now. It does get pretty loud. The speaker gets quite loud, but it doesn't have the same audio quality that the stereo speakers have. It just doesn't have that bass. It doesn't have that fidelity. It just doesn't feel like a all-encompassing kind of speaker experience that I've kind of come to expect. It's almost like it's kind of muffled sometimes, and it just doesn't do a good job with the bass. So, I'm just going to show you guys a clip of this real quick so you guys can listen for yourself and judge and kind of see what the volume range is like. So now that I've covered the speakers, the battery, and most of the other stuff, let's get into the big stuff, the performance. So this has a Snapdragon 765G chip. It's got 8 gigs of RAM and 128 gigs of storage. There is a 12 GB and a 256 option that you can buy. I didn't go for that. I think that's a little bit unnecessary. This does come with 5G. However, it is not millimeter wave, so you don't expect to use 1,000 Mbps speeds on this phone. That's not going to happen. This only supports the sub-6 networks as far as I can tell. So that's kind of the ultra wideband networks. You can expect maybe 100, 150 Mbps of those 5G speeds, but really, I think the highest that ultra widebands have been reported to get were somewhere around 200 megabits. So it has 5G to just say it has 5G. You're really never gonna be able to reap the benefits of 5G from this phone. That being said, putting 5G aside, the performance is actually pretty good. OnePlus did a good job of making sure that the animations and everything don't lag, that they feel smooth, and I really haven't been able to tell in too many places that this has a less capable chipset compared to the 8 Pro, so that's a very good thing. I did notice a few stutters here and there. Some apps did take a little bit longer to load. There were some apps that crashed, but I think that was a little bit more the app's fault than the phone. So the performance I am very satisfied with. The one thing that I will kind of bring back in a future video is see how it ages, because mid-range these chipsets, they start off very strong, but most times I've noticed as time goes on, they just go kind of downhill with that. So that's going to be interesting to see. Moving on, let's talk about the software, kind of the experience that goes hand in hand with hardware. And Oxygen OS is just a familiar, very well-known kind of skin now. The one thing that's very interesting is that now that the phone is kind of this budget phone, it actually comes with a stock Google Dialer app. Compared to the OnePluses of past. So all the OnePlus phones I've had before this for a very long time have come with their own dialer app, the OnePlus's own dialer app, OnePlus's own messages app. This has Google stock apps, and they don't have the OnePlus apps installed at all. I don't know why they did this. Just a weird kind of change here, but that's actually good because I prefer Google's dialer compared to OnePlus's, so that's really good. Another thing that I don't like about this is that it ships pre-installed with apps like Amazon, Facebook, Instagram, Netflix, Prime Video. You just can't uninstall a lot of these things, and that's very annoying to me. One more thing I'm going to show you guys. I'm going to go into settings. I'm going to show you this Android security update version. So you guys, right there, you can see it. It says July 1, 2020. The date today is September 9th. So it's the 9th of September, and this phone that came out in August, this came out August 6th, like that's when it was available for public sale. It's still running the July 1 security patch. And to everybody who I know is going to inevitably yell at me to go update my phone, let me show you guys, my system is up to date. Right there, system is up to date. There are no new updates. And I've gotten 3 updates. This phone came with, 2 updates. This phone shipped with Oxygen OS 10.5.4. I got 10.5.5 and 5.6. Neither of them contained the August security update or the September security update. So a very disappointing thing. OnePlus is just really falling behind with the updates, and that's a very disappointing thing to me. You know, overall the experience is fine with Oxygen OS, but it's no longer one of my favorites. I think that stock Google just has a lot more to offer now compared to Oxygen OS, because Oxygen OS at least used to pride itself on being fast to update, fast to just not have any bloatware. A lot of those things have gone now. They've disappeared. So I think software-wise it's just become one of those skins again. It's not something that you can really compliment the phone on. So moving on, let's talk about the cameras. The cameras are a very interesting part of this phone because OnePlus, they have outright said, and it is still on their website, that this is a flagship camera. And I'm not just saying this to say this. This is what they say themselves, and that's weird because before you do anything, let me talk about the camera setup here. This has a 48 megapixel primary camera, an 8 megapixel ultra wide, a 5 megapixel depth lens, and a 2 megapixel macro lens on the back. And then in the front, you've got a 32 megapixel main camera and an 8 megapixel ultra wide with a 105 degree field of vision. So instead of just talking about the cameras, what I'm going to do is show you guys a bunch of samples, both photos and videos, and compare it with the iPhone SE, its closest rivals, to give you guys an idea of where this phone ranks, talking purely about the camera. All right, so jumping right into it, this is a photo from the ultra-wide camera. Things are looking pretty decent here. There is a little bit of softness and lack of sharpness around the leaves, the green-colored leaves in this photo. But I think overall this does a decent job. There is a little bit of that fisheye effect going on towards the extreme edges. But the center of the photo looks pretty decent. So not the greatest ultra-wide camera, but at least there is an ultra-wide camera. Moving on, this is the main sensor, the wide-angle 48 megapixel sensor, which is looking pretty decent. The colors do look a little bit different on this compared to the ultra-wide, which I will talk about a little bit more moving forward. But this is a pretty decent image. One thing I do notice is that colors look pretty nice. There's a good amount of detail in the center, but again, off-center, things start to get a little bit fuzzy and soft, and that's just kind of a trend we'll be seeing throughout with this phone. Moving on, now this is a 2x photo, so there is a 2x option in the camera app. However, this is not a telephoto lens. This is just the wide angle zoomed in, cropped in digitally. So the OnePlus kind of tricks you into thinking that there's a 2x zoom, but really there isn't. This is just a digital zoom that you could get on any camera. So again, quality doesn't look that good because of course it's just the main camera zoomed in. So avoid using this if you can. Moving on, let's talk about another ultra-wide image. Now this is where we'll see what I was talking about earlier. So pay attention to the sky here. I'm going to move into the secondary camera, the main camera, I'm sorry, and just look at the difference in the sky. So there you go. Look at that difference. So it's so much grayer than it was on the ultra-wide. It looks like it was taking it 2 different times. I'll switch back to it and you guys can see the ultra-wide looks a lot more blue, but when we go back to the wide, things are a lot more gray, dark, and there's just 2 completely different color profiles between the two that are just unrealistic, right? They were taken seconds after each other. The sky was not that drastically different between those few seconds. So moving on, it's just not that interesting. You know, just that difference itself is very off-putting. It goes to show that color calibration between the 2 cameras was not done properly, and you know, that's just not a good thing. Definitely will be something that I think goes against this phone. Moving on, let's just look at another normal photo of a couple of flowers here. So it does pretty good with the colors from what I see. Again, an issue that I'm seeing is that the softness of some things of this image are very apparent. Looking at a couple of leaves towards the top, towards the bottom, this image just does not you know, contain the same level of sharpness that you would expect from a camera to have, especially since the subject, you know, those leaves aren't drastically out of focus. Like, they're not too far behind the main flower that's in focus. So this is just a you know, that kind of, it has it's almost bokeh, but it's not bokeh. It just looks like it's out of focus and hazy. It just doesn't look good. This is another photo, but I think this one overall, this does a much better job, and there's not a lot to complain about here. Things look a lot better, and since those other objects are further in the back, this doesn't have that kind of soft look to it. It looks more like a natural bokeh, and it's just, you know, the colors are good. This is a pretty challenging photo because there's a lot of direct sunlight, but also this is a kind of a shady area, so it's battling between the two, but it does a pretty decent job of making sure that all the details are right and the exposure was correct. So a pretty decent image. Now moving on, let's talk about one of the biggest failures of this camera as a whole, and that is the inclusion of a macro camera. This macro camera was not necessary at all. Just look at the difference between using the primary camera close up compared to switching to the macro lens. And the astonishing fact here is that OnePlus doesn't automatically switch to the macro lens anyways. You have to manually go and touch that macro button, and that's when you will see the macro camera switch over. OnePlus knows this is a garbage sensor, so they don't automatically go to it ever. You have to manually enable it, and the results are just, I don't even know why they bothered including it, you know. It's very clearly just a marketing gimmick here at this point, so that they could say they have 4 cameras instead of 3 or 2. So if you're going to take things, you know, close-up images, stick with the primary camera. It's amazingly better quality compared to that macro lens, which is just absolute garbage. Moving on, let's look at this photo. This was a night mode photo, so this was at night. Nightscape mode is what they call their night shots, and this is a pretty good photo. Things look pretty good. There's a lot of detail in that tree, and the best way to show you guys what I mean is by showing you a photo that was taken without Nightscape on. And if you look at this, things look so much more, you know, there's don't lack that detail. Things look over smoothed out. While it's not completely dark and you can still make out things, the detail is just done. Like, there's no detail whatsoever in this photo, and it looks bad. It doesn't look like it's a good photo. So This one just looks far better when we look at the nightscape mode. I'm very impressed with the results it got, and I did try a couple of other night shots as well, and they just overall consistently do a good job. So night shots, nightscape mode is very impressive on the OnePlus Nord. Moving on, let's talk about the front camera. And the front camera, the first image we're looking at here is the ultra wide camera. So there are two front cameras, and this is the ultra wide, and this is just a bad photo. Like I can't. And this is not the first photo I took. I took a couple of photos, and all of them were shaky, blurry. They just didn't look right, and it just I kept trying, but this is kind of the kind of consistent result I was getting out of my ultra wide camera. The colors are bad. The detail is missing. Dynamic range is horrible. So overall, this ultra wide camera is not that high quality. I would not recommend using it, ever. So moving on, let's look at the normal 32 megapixel camera. So this is a way better in terms of quality. It's got a pretty good field of view on its own. I don't think it's really that bad at all. The one thing where it does lack out very clearly is that the color is just off. It's not. That t-shirt isn't as light as it looks, and you guys will see a little bit further in the video, and my skin is just not that, like, the exposure on my skin and the way it's blown out the highlights, no, that's just not the way that photo should be. I think that's definitely a mark against it. So the front camera, while the clarity is there, everything else is just not as good. But the one thing I will say is that, at least on this wide angle, dynamic range is looking a lot better compared to the ultra wide. Finally, let's look at an indoor selfie, low light condition, pretty good overall. A very satisfied image, I think. This doesn't, this is not a very expensive phone, so I'm not expecting the greatest results in low light with the front camera, but I think this is satisfactory. There's a pretty good amount of detail in there. While there is a lot missing in terms of detail, just my shirt, if you remember, this was the same shirt from before, and this has polka dots on it, but if you look closer, there's just no polka dots on that t-shirt anymore. The smoothing is so aggressive to make the photo look good that they just completely wash out every semblance of detail. But I think it's still pretty decent. Alright, moving on. This is a little bit of a toss-up here, and what I'm doing is showing you guys side-by-side comparisons of the iPhone SE with the OnePlus Nord. What I realized was when I was looking at these OnePlus Nord photos was I don't know if this is great or not because I don't have a reference. I don't have a comparison point. So I decided to grab my iPhone SE, go out and take a couple of photos alongside the OnePlus Nord, and these are the results. So the first photo, a couple of photos I took, results were pretty similar in a few situations. This is one of those where things look pretty similar on both of them. The iPhone SE definitely has a little bit more contrast, and the blacks are a little bit more, deep, a little bit more clearly seen compared to the Nord. But both of them are very similar in terms of the exposure, the highlights, everything. It's a very similar image, and there's no real clear winner here. Moving on, let's look at this photo, and this is where one of OnePlus's main weaknesses comes to show. So looking at the center of the image, this tree trunk, most of the image looks pretty similar, with the iPhone SE just looking a little bit darker with more contrast. But the real difference here is when you look at the bottom left of both of these photos. Because that's not exactly on center and focus, just look at how much the OnePlus Nord messes this up. Like, there's almost all the details washed out compared to the iPhone SE. This is just atrocious to me. And this has just been a common thing that OnePlus has been doing. So moving on, this is the next photo, and this one is a little bit of a challenging photo, and it was taken specifically to test two things: the dynamic range and the post-image processing. And this is where another place where the iPhone definitely shines, because the post-processing just looks fantastic here. If you look towards the left of both images, there's a cluster of leaves there, and the iPhone SE, those are just so much more visible. They're a lot more, the brightness there and the kind of balance they've kept with exposure is fantastic comparing to the Nord. Similarly, when we look at the sun, the Nord is kind of overpowering the sun. The exposure on that is pretty aggressive, and you guys can just clearly see there's like a complete beam of light there. When we compare it to the SE has it a lot more controlled. The exposure there is maintained, and you can just see that the colors there look a little bit more natural compared to the Nord, whereas things look way more blue, darkish blue. It's a weird kind of combination of colors going on there. That post-processed image that it produces, it's just on a different level, and of course it will be, because that's carried right over from the iPhone 11, and those cameras are just fantastic. So this one clearly goes to the iPhone SE. Moving on, let's look at a front camera image of both of them. So one thing that I am noticing right off the bat is just look at the color, right? My skin is just the biggest indicator here. Look at how different it is. The iPhone SE actually looks like I'm a human person with this human skin. The Nord just makes me look like a pale weirdo that doesn't look good. And if you don't believe me in that, just look at the t-shirt. And the t-shirt, I can attest to, it looks like what it is in the iPhone SE's image. Like, it's not as light as that. The iPhone just does a lot better with colors consistently. It looks real, very real to life compared to the Nord, where it struggles with that. It goes a little bit harder to just find the right balance between highlights, exposure, and all those things. And it just definitely feels like the iPhone SE takes the advantage here. However, the one place where the Nord does have a clear advantage is that it has more in the frame. So this isn't even the ultra wide, this is just the normal, and even then it has way more in frame compared to the iPhone SE. So if you are looking to take a lot of selfies with a lot of people in it, or if you want to get a lot of scenery in the background into the photos, the iPhone SE just isn't for you. The field of view is very narrow on it, and I think that's a big disappointment for it. So right now here, I'll give the win to the iPhone, but I think it's by a very narrow margin. I think that if the SE nailed the colors, it would have taken it, but just because it didn't nail the colors, I can't give it to it. Now, moving on to an indoor selfie, and this one's no contest. The OnePlus Nord is just far, far, far better. At least, it's so much more clearer. The details are better. It doesn't look grainy. It doesn't look out of focus. The colors, surprisingly, they're so much better. Just look at the t-shirt, man. They look like two completely different colors. The one thing, the easiest way to really tell is don't even look at me. Look at the poster behind me. Look at that Porsche, and just look at the difference when you look at these two photos. The iPhone SE is just very weak when it comes to photography indoors and in low light, and it just shows, and it doesn't even have a night mode to help out. This is just not a good showing, and that is a very clear weakness of the iPhone SE. So the OnePlus Nord takes that one. Final image that I want to compare, low light on both of these. So now, while the iPhone SE image actually, while it looks darker, it does have detail, right? It's pretty detailed of an image, and if you zoom in, you can see that the details are all there. In fact, there's certain areas where there's a little bit more detail. However, what I think is important right now when we look at low light images is that it gets a decent amount of brightness as well. The image needs to look bright in a lot more cases, and the Nord just nails that, and this is without night mode even turned on. So with night mode turned on, the results would be even better. So the iPhone SE has no night mode, so that's it. Like, that's the best it can do. But the Nord, there's even more of a better chance for it to improve. So this one, I think the Nord clearly takes. The iPhone does get detail right, but I think that it still needs to improve with that brightness aspect to make the image look a little bit more pleasing. So with that, the images being looked at, what I'm going to do is move in and show you guys a couple of videos of that I took right out of the OnePlus Nord, and kind of talk about some of the weird camera issues that I had with it while I was doing those tests. Alright guys, this is the rear camera of the OnePlus Nord. So, I am shooting in 4K 30 FPS here. The video you guys are watching is actually 1080 60 FPS, so you're not really going to get the right experience out of this, but this is the highest setting that the rear camera allows. And of course you can switch between lenses. There is the wide, and then there is the ultra wide as well, which is not showing up right now, but that is an option that you can choose before you start filming. Afterwards, once you've started filming, you can only zoom in, so I can zoom all the way up to 10x zoom. Pretty bad quality, but that is what you can do. So no lens switching between while you're filming, so that is a little bit disappointing. Let me switch over to the ultra wide. So continuing on, this is the ultra wide, and now I am locked into this. I cannot zoom at all during this video. This is basically it, and this is without super stable on. If you turn super stable on, you cannot use the ultra wide. you are stuck. You are limited to just the main camera. So that is a little bit limiting. I am sure that there's a little bit of EIS going on here, but just let me know what the quality looks like. I'm going to try to shake it around a little bit as I walk, just kind of see what happens here. But again, audio is right out of this OnePlus Nord rear camera. This is the ultra wide. Alright guys, so this is a very weird thing going on here. So this is 4K 60 FPS on the front camera of the OnePlus Nord. Now, number one, it's not letting me go into the ultra wide camera. This is the normal wide angle. And second thing, just getting into this mode was crazy because I tried like 6 or 7 times and it wouldn't let me. I just kept getting an error again and again. And finally, I just had to close all the apps, restart the phone, and that's when it finally let me get into 60 frames per second. The normal rear camera doesn't support 4K 60 FPS, so I'm not sure. This is one of the first phones that does it. The front camera supports it, but the rear doesn't. So even though the front does, by the way, the ultra-wide does not, just the wide angle. So a lot of weird limiting things going on here with the OnePlus, where certain cameras can do certain things, whereas the others can't. Not a very consistent experience. So this is what the camera looks like. I'm kind of not sure. Definitely not doing well with, ultra exposure. It's just blowing everything out. But when the light is just right, it looks pretty decent. So let me know what you guys think about the quality here. And now what I'm going to do is switch to 1080 60 FPS to show you guys what the difference is, and also show you guys the ultra wide. Alright guys, so I know I said that I would do the 1080 60 FPS, but when I switch over to 60 FPS on 1080, I realized that the 60 FPS factor is what doesn't allow you to go to the ultra wide. So the ultra wide camera just doesn't support 60 FPS on the front at all. So what's going on here is that I switched over to 4K 30, and this is the normal wide angle lens. Let me switch over to the ultra wide to show you guys what exactly that looks like and what the differences are. Alright, so here we go, front camera ultra wide now. Let me know what you guys think about the color, the picture quality. The ultra wide is definitely a little bit lower on the quality scale compared to that normal wide angle. So I'm not sure what it's looking like, what stabilization is going to look like. Definitely, I can see when you get brightness behind you, sun is shining right there, it just blows everything out. So the HDR is not really that fantastic on the front camera, but, quality-wise, things are looking pretty decent. So let me know what you guys think. Alright guys, this is the rear camera and indoor lighting. So this is pretty low lighting. It's right about the lighting condition where most phones start to struggle, I'd say. Not the worst quality from what I'm seeing, but definitely could be better. One of the things that is most importantly missing here is that you cannot switch between the wide and ultra wide while you're filming here. You have to have a different frame rate selected. So 1080 at 30, you can switch between the cameras while you are in video. So while I'm taking video, I could switch, but right now, since I'm at 4K 30, I can't do that. I'd have to, whichever one I selected when I started the video, that's the one I'm locked to. So weird things going on there. So one thing I am seeing is that it does, have to fight a little bit to find focus in lower lighting. It's not as instantaneous as when you're outdoors and there's better lighting. So I think that there's a little bit of a ways to go, but let me switch over to the ultra wide. So here's the ultra wide, same light, same condition, but you guys can just see the ultra wide does not do a good job. Ultra wides just need a lot more light, and this one is clearly failing. It's just kind of an inherent thing of the type of cameras these are. Darker objects just are not visible. So right here, my Galaxy Buds just were not visible at all. They're kind of hidden in this camouflage of darkness. It's just not the best for indoor solution. So if you are going to be filming indoors, definitely might want to reconsider this one. Alright guys, so this is the front camera, the wide angle. I am at 4K 30 FPS, and similar to the rear camera, when you're on certain resolutions, you can't switch between cameras. So I cannot switch to the ultra wide right now, but the weirder thing is that if you have 60 frames per second selected, so this does go up to 4K 60 FPS and 1080 60 FPS, you cannot use the ultra wide at all. You can only use the wide angle. So weird things going on here. Let me switch over to the ultra wide and show you guys what that looks like. So here's the ultra wide, pretty similar, kind of garbage quality, I'd say. Looking a little bit darker for sure compared to the, the wide angle, the normal lens. It kind of makes sense why they don't want you to go up in those frame rates things would just start looking even worse. At least I think, the stabilization wise and just looking at random things, it's doing a decent enough job. I'd say a little bit more would be nicer, but really at this price point, this is a sacrifice you're just gonna have to make. Alright guys, so this is the OnePlus Nord on the right and the iPhone SE on the left, just showing you guys a quick comparison video to show you what video quality looks like on both. Both are locked to 1080 60 FPS, and the super stable is turned on the OnePlus Nord, so it'll be interesting to see what the stabilization compares to, like, especially when I'm moving around on the screen. It definitely looks like the Nord is doing a much better job, but you can never know. When you look at it in post, things may change. So let me know what you guys think. I'm going to try to get in close here, to show you guys some details of things. Color-wise, the iPhone SE is just looking way better, but you never know once again. So let me know what the audio and stuff sounds like as well. And of course, stabilization. All right, guys, so this is the front camera test of the OnePlus Nord on the right and the iPhone SE on the left. Both are at 1080 30 FPS, and that's because the iPhone SE can only do 1080 at 30 FPS on the front camera. It cannot go up to 4K 60 FPS like the OnePlus Nord can, so that is definitely a point against the iPhone. The one thing I am noticing is that the iPhone SE is not doing as good of a job with the background of the video. Things are looking way more blown out compared to the Nord, but the color of my skin and everything is looking way more natural on the iPhone SE. Again, this is all initial impressions of what I'm seeing on the display. On the screen, it could look very different when I get it into post, but this is pretty much what it's looking like when you compare both of them side by side. Let me know what you guys think, and of course, I did forget to mention this, the OnePlus Nord is on ultra wide, so that's why you guys can see so much more into the frame. It's just that this one is on the wider frame. You can go to the wide angle, which is very similar to what the iPhone SE looks like, but having that ultra wide is nice. Alright guys, so you saw it all. You saw the performance, the camera, the battery, everything I could show you about this phone I've showed you, and what are my final thoughts on it? So, starting off, I think this is a decent phone. I think that they've done a good job with this phone. It's just that I think the hype worked against this phone, right? There was too much hype. It built up expectations to a level where it just could not be met. Availability of this phone is kind of sketchy at best, is what I'd like to say. It's available in certain countries, it's not available in certain countries. Some things aren't available in certain countries. There's a 6GB, 64 gig model that's not available anywhere in the world except in India. It's just a lot going on, and it's just not a very consistent experience in terms of sales and availability. The one thing I will say is, though, that for the price, you're paying about $400, and I think that this is a reasonable price to ask for this device. It's not overpriced, but it's not underpriced. It's not like a great deal. It's not something that you're stealing. It's just like, it's fair. I think that this is what they should be charging for it. So that's what's going on price-wise. I think that value-wise, you're getting what you're paying for. The display is definitely the strong point of this phone. It's got that beautiful 6.4-inch flat 1080p 90 hertz refresh rate display. I think it does a really good job. And comparing it to its main rivals, the Google Pixel 4a and the iPhone SE, it's definitely got the best display of the bunch, I'd say. Battery life's a little bit disappointing to me. I was expecting a lot coming from the OnePlus 8 Pro. Since this has a smaller screen, it's got a less power-intensive screen, it's got a less power-intensive chip. I just thought that this battery life would be better than the 8 Pro. Unfortunately, I was mistaken. It was a little bit worse than the 8 Pro. Not sure what's going on, but I got about 6 to 7 hours of screen on time out of one charge. So the biggest thing here we have to talk about is the cameras. They are not flagship. Like, OnePlus is, at this point, I really think just like false advertising. Those cameras are not flagship quality. It's a big fat lie. Just look at the features and stuff. Like, there's so much limits to the things you can do. Like, there's a super steady, stabilization mode, but you can only use it in certain frame rates with certain resolutions. There's 4K 60 FPS, but that's only applicable to the front camera and the 32 megapixel front camera, not the ultra wide. If you want, certain things, you can only get it with certain frame rates. So if you want to switch between lenses during filming, you can't use a certain frame rate. Like, there's so much going on that it's just not. It's not good. Like, the camera quality, the video quality is decent, but not good. Like, I think that comparing it to the iPhone, it's just not even close. I mean, iPhones are always been the king with video, but this one is just a big step down, I think. The reality is, though, that the cameras, I think they could have been better, but what happened was OnePlus decided that instead of going for the quality of camera, they go for quantity of camera. So you've got 4 cameras, 2 of which are straight up useless. The depth sensor and the macro sensor, absolutely useless, pointless. They could have saved that money and put it towards something else, and that's disappointing to me. And it's just kind of the moral of this story is that this phone was designed for the marketing team. They made it the best way possible so that the marketing team's job was easy, so that they could hype this phone up and make it easy to sell. But the reality is, I think that they could have done with even a single camera and a much, much better quality, much better software processing, image processing, all that could have been improved. Now, who is this phone for? This phone is for the people that want the fanciest display at this price point, and they want the best possible kind of experience with a 5G phone, because this is the only one right now that offers 5G. And honestly speaking, 5G is also not that great of a deal right now because you don't get millimeter wave support on the OnePlus Nord. You are limited to sub 6 gigahertz, the ultra wideband spectrum, which is not that fast in the first place. So really, it's just kind of a 5G to brag about 5G. I really don't think that's going to be very useful. While I won't say that this is a phone I won't recommend, it's also not a phone that I can recommend to everyone. I think this is a very specific kind of Android user in mind that I can recommend this phone to. So depending on where you live is also a big factor, because this is not available widely. So I can't just make a general statement and say this is the best Android. Like, if you want an Android phone, buy this, because it's simply just not available everywhere. So that makes it hard to recommend. So that's just it for this one, guys. I really don't know where to go from there. It's just a good phone, but a very selective kind of audience will appreciate the true kind of compromise this phone has made. So let me know what you guys think of my assessment of the OnePlus Nord. Do you agree with me? Do you disagree with me? Let me know down in the comments below. And if you haven't already, be sure to follow me on social media. I'll have all my handles right here on the screen, and of course down in the description below. So go check me out over there. And if you haven't already, be sure to check out my blog. I did a post about the OnePlus Nord's unboxing experience that I talked about earlier in this video. So that is also linked in the description. Go read that if you want to find out more about what my experience was like. That's it for this one, guys. Thank you so much for watching. I'll catch you in the next one.